Today's misunderstood topic is resale value. What is it? How is it calculated? Why it probably matters less than you think? And who should actually be concerned about resale value? Put simply, resale value is another way to talk about depreciation. What is your vehicle worth after some period of time, after you've used it for a while, whether that's 3 years, like the term on the average lease, or whether that's 5 years, like we find in the Edmunds true cost to own numbers. We're going to be talking a lot about Edmunds TCO numbers in this video, not because I think they're bad, although we will talk about why the depreciation number can be a little bit misleading, but because I think they're truly fantastic, because it's not just about the purchase price of the car or its depreciation. It's about everything else that you have to do with that car. You have to maintain it, you have to repair it, you have to insure it, etc. And the Edmunds TCO numbers are a really good way to compare apples to oranges in so much as you can, whether we're talking about cars across segments, cars versus SUVs versus trucks, etc. If you want to know what it's really going to cost to keep a vehicle around, I would say it's a really good resource to use, but I would say pay a little bit less to that depreciation, a little bit less attention to that depreciation number than you might otherwise. The fundamental problem with resale value in the way that we usually use it in the automotive industry is that it does not take into account discounts off MSRP or dealer markups on top of MSRP. The calculation is simply MSRP for the vehicle and then what it was worth after 5 years. There you get your 5-year resale value number. But think about this. If you get $10,000 on the hood on your Ram 1500 or Silverado 1500 or Ford F-150, which happens quite regularly in the United States, that's going to have a dramatic impact on your resale value, because the reality is nobody's paying full price for any of these trucks, let alone some of those trucks, of course. And that means that when you look at their value over time, if something is intrinsically worth half of what you paid for it after 5 years, if you started from a much lower point, but you're still calculating off that higher point, that's where a lot of the difference can come, not always, but can come when we're talking about resale value. Likewise, if something is selling well above MSRP and they're putting a huge amount of dealer markup on it, then that's also going to affect this calculation. It's now time to sharpen our pencils and talk about some of the numbers on your screen. We have a 2024 Toyota 4Runner Limited and a 2024 Grand Cherokee Limited as well. And I chose these two models because they're pretty close in price, although the Grand Cherokee is a little bit less expensive than the 4Runner. Doesn't make too much difference for this exercise. Now, if I went back and looked at what 2024s often retailed for, it looks like the Toyota 4Runner was typically selling right around MSRP. Now, Toyota does average a little bit below MSRP currently, but not nearly as below MSRP as Jeep averages. Jeep averages about 10% below MSRP at the moment. Toyota seems to be running about 4 to 4.5% below MSRP, pretty similar in the 2024 model year. Now, this will obviously vary based on the model, and the 4Runner seems to typically go much closer to MSRP, even with some slight markups on certain models. Grand Cherokee, though, lots of cash on the hood. On the Grand Cherokee side of things, if we simply went for a 10% discount, which is $5,271 off MSRP, bearing in mind that my local dealer is currently selling a Grand Cherokee Limited with $8,000 on the hood, keep that in mind, that would drop down our price to $47,443. So already a decent discount off of the MSRP. They also have really low finance rates on that Grand Cherokee. We'll get to that in just a moment. But simply lowering that starting price to $47,443 kind of helps us with the resale value calculation. So the value of the Grand Cherokee, Edmunds is probably right here that it's going to be worth $25,780 after 5 years versus $35,719 over here for the 4Runner. Those are the values after 5 years. That means 4Runner, 65% of its value. If we start crunching the numbers on the Grand Cherokee, it starts looking better. Not as good as the 4Runner, but definitely closing that gap. By the default calculation versus MSRP, it's worth 48% after 5 years. If you got 10% off, though, that number bumps up to 54% resale value. If you got $8,000 off, like my local dealer is offering on a 2025, and it's still worth that same $25,780 after 5 years, then you'd have a personal resale value calculation of 57%. Not as good as 65%. And of course, if you got that 4Runner with some cash on its hood, maybe it would bump up to 67, 68%, something like that. But there is a little bit more going on here as well, because throughout 2024, it looks like Toyota's least expensive financing rate was 4.8% over that time period. Jeep, on the other hand, averaged 1.9% financing, with several months offering 0% financing on a decent number of the Grand Cherokee lineup. Obviously, these finance rates are for well-qualified buyers, etc., etc. But let's take a look at the rest of this calculation. So, on the Grand Cherokee, taxes and fees, if we have the $5,271 discount off MSRP, that number, not $5,400, goes down to $4,880. Financing, 1.9% financing would cost you $3,080 over 72 months. Those were the offers that we were able to find there. Versus the 4.8% financing over here on the Toyota 4Runner. That's a slight discount versus what Edmunds was averaging there, but still $9,210 of financing costs. On the fuel costs, we're going to leave those there because, it's going to be dependent on your area, and these are based on the same calculations. But the Grand Cherokee was notably more fuel efficient than the 4Runner of that time. So fuel costs, definitely lower in the Grand Cherokee. Insurance costs, repair costs, maintenance costs, those are all basically the same. So what does that end up meaning? Well, if we run our quick calculation here, it actually means that the true cost to own this Grand Cherokee 2024 ends up actually being about $9,000 less than the Toyota 4Runner. Yes, it's still not going to be worth as much at the end. Its resale value is still going to be $25,780 versus the resale value of the 4Runner at $35,719. But if you were to buy them, drive them for 5 years, and then sell them, you would still have spent less money if you had bought the Jeep and its transmission didn't fall out. Obviously repair and maintenance costs could be higher, potentially higher in the Jeep, but in this 5-year maintenance cost window, it's probably not going to be enormously different. And that's exactly what Edmunds' numbers say here. They say that the repair costs are going to be about $700 more for this time period. So that's one example of a vehicle that supposedly has low resale value actually looking a little bit better. Again, not actually better than the 4Runner, but depending on your situation, it may not make much difference at all, especially if you're financing your vehicle. Now, if you're paying cash for the vehicle, just cross out those financing costs, go with that. Now, it's also important to remember that if you're leasing a vehicle, then it doesn't matter at all, because all that matters is your lease payment. The resale value is theoretically calculated by the leasing company. Those numbers are just pulled out of a hat sometimes. So really all that matters is what's your actual monthly payment and your down payment on that lease. Don't worry about resale value at all whatsoever. The other situation where you don't need to worry about resale value is if you supposedly drive it till the wheels fall off. Because if you are truly driving your car till it has 200,000 miles on the clock, your resale value difference between a Grand Cherokee and a 4Runner is not going to be enormous. You will have used up so much of the value of that vehicle over that time period that all the other factors are of much greater importance. And in fact, the further beyond the 5-year window you go, the less important resale value really is. And the more important fuel costs, repair costs, insurance costs, etc. become. But let's talk about the opposite situation here. If you recall, back in 2022, there were a few things going on. We were, of course, recovering from pandemic sales stress on the automotive market, and we had a brand new Kia Telluride on the market. And the Telluride was hot, hot, hot. In fact, all of Kia was hot. Kia had one of the highest averages over MSRP in the industry. The average Kia was selling 6% over MSRP. And as a percentage of MSRP, that was the highest over in the industry. On average, the average Kia had more than $2,000 worth of markups. And that's for every Kia out there, from a Kia Soul all the way on up to the Telluride. And this also has an impact on resale value. But it's not the pretty kind of impact on resale value. So let's pop up these two examples here. Now, I know these aren't 2022s. I could not find historic numbers. If you go back on Edmunds now, you'll notice that they're going to be talking about used car numbers. But this is still a really good illustration, because here you'll see that things have kind of reset to what you might normally assume they should be. If we calculate the resale value here, according to MSRP, the Pilot's worth 57% after 5 years. Meanwhile, the Kia Telluride is worth 55%. Definitely good. Definitely a long way from where Kia used to be, but not quite as good as the Honda. And that kind of fits with what our brains want to see, right? The problem with big dealer markups on hot new cars like a Telluride or a Maverick is that they can momentarily make it look like those cars have fantastic resale value. But there's going to be a point where the market will level off and those hot cars will come off the boil, so to speak, and then you can really see what's happening. And we definitely see that with the Telluride, where, again, the resale value calculation now is about 55%, not those bonkers crazy numbers. But how did we get there in the first place? Well, it actually makes sense when you dive into the numbers again. Because say on that Telluride, instead of $56,686, there was a $10,000 dealer markup on it, and that made that $66,686. But we all still said, well, that car is still worth 55% of that value after, 5 years, or $36,677. Well, you can see that that 55% resale value number actually goes up to 65% resale value calculated off MSRP. So that's one of the effects of actually overpaying for your car, is that it helps inflate that resale value number up, even though it's really just 55% of what you paid for the vehicle. Now, the problem is if later that resale value number ends up being 55% of the MSRP, and you paid $10,000 more than the MSRP, the real resale value for your transaction ends up quite a bit lower than 55%. In that situation, it ends up at about 47%. This is also part of why we see things like Jeep Wranglers with fantastic resale values. The average Jeep Wrangler has a fantastic markup on it. If we take a look here at recent reporting, the average Jeep Wrangler has apparently a 23% price difference between asking price and MSRP. Now, some of this does have to do with dealer installed accessories and the average kind of stuff that's jammed on to the average Wrangler, but people are definitely paying way over MSRP for that Wrangler. And that is probably why, even though a logical person would think that a Wrangler's resale value should be lower than a 4Runner, in reality it probably is. It's just that you're paying over MSRP for the vehicle to begin with, and that kind of inflates its value after time, but we're basing those resale value calculations off MSRP. This is part of the reason that we find depressed resale value in electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles. Now, it is by no means the only factor going on here. There are lots of moving parts, but it certainly has a substantial impact on the price here. Why would you pay anywhere close to MSRP for a Tesla Model Y on the used car market when you could buy a brand new one and get $7,500 off that MSRP? So intrinsically, it drops that resale value the moment it moves by about $7,500. And then, of course, you get the typical hit of depreciation that happens in any other new vehicle. And it does not seem to matter whether the vehicle itself or the purchaser qualifies for that tax credit, because on the secondary market, I don't care whether you got the tax credit or not. If you made too much money and you didn't get the tax credit, I don't care. I could still run out and buy a Model Y with a $7,500 discount. Or I could go lease a vehicle. Any EV qualifies for the $7,500 treatment on a lease. Whether or not that's passed on to you as the consumer, that's a different matter. But every business purchase qualifies for that tax credit as well. And that has the effect of being cash on the hood and operating just like some of these other metrics. It's a little bit more shielded, but it's still a big, big factor. And that's part of why we see these stories of really poor resale values in EVs. Just think about that critically for a second. Why would anybody buy a used Blazer, even if it was a dealer demo model that had been registered and only had 50 miles on it? Why would you buy that one other than a Blazer that had the $7,500 tax credit? You wouldn't, right? That dealer would have to discount that used model by at least that much for you to be interested in it. And that's exactly what goes on when it comes to the resale value calculations. The bottom line here is that if you lease your vehicle or you keep your vehicle forever, resale value likely does not matter to you in the real world at all. But If you buy a vehicle and then you trade it in after 3 years or 5 years or even 7 years, then resale value calculations are a bit more important. But really pay close attention to your personal resale value situation, because the picture is not as simple as this percentage. The financing rate has a big impact if you're financing the vehicle, and some of these lower resale value cars out there from lower resale brands will often have really cheap financing, and that will actually level the playing field by quite a lot. They still may not have the kind of resale value you get in something else, but if they have $5,000 or $10,000 of cash on the hood and 0% financing, the actual picture in the end could be better than paying more for that more valuable vehicle long term. See all of you later.